Joel, so glad to have you. You have such a cool background, right? So, director of sales at Paramount today. It was just Viacom CBS when we asked you to come and be one of our speakers, which we're excited to have you come share. But you have so many large brands that you've worked with. So, maybe we could just start by having you introduce yourself and let us know a bit about your background and certainly what you're doing today. And then we'll kind of jump into the NFT space and your passion for all things Web3.
Absolutely. No, thank you for the time and the opportunity, Ian. So a little bit about me. I've worked in advertising in one way or another for the last decade, primarily working with big brands and creating content and overall programs to help drive sales of their products in store or online. That's the professional side of it. I'm actually based in Bentonville, Arkansas. Everyone's always like, why Bentonville? Turns out Walmart's based here. Walmart's largest retailer in the world. So I think about this concept of, commerce quite often, literally every day. In terms of Web3, it's been an interesting, unexpected journey, I would say. The short version being started January of last year, my year like I normally would, to your point, talking to brands about how to create content to help drive sales of their products. Come February, started reading articles about virtual land selling for millions of dollars. And at first thinking it was insane. One thing led to another. And I've been spending some amount of time literally every day since then, learning more and, gaining a perspective about the ecosystem, both internally for our brands and the broader ecosystem as a whole.
Can you talk a bit about the community aspect that makes NFT land so different than the end consumer aspect of huge brands where it's a night and day difference. So, and then maybe we'll talk about how brands can be thoughtful of that. But first, just as a part of the community, how has your experience been in the NFT world, Discord channels, et cetera, compared to what your experience been working with huge brands and seeing that end result in terms of community engagement or lack thereof?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we have a fun opportunity to create more engaged experiences because they have the opportunity to co-own and co-create with the brand. To me, that's part of the magic of Web3. Those are things that certainly the incentives were not there for the consumer previously, where now they can be. I get excited about that, but I mean, think about the type of brands we have in our portfolio. Nickelodeon, CMT, Comedy Central, Paramount, all the movies within all of those, like within Nickelodeon alone, you have SpongeBob, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Paw Patrol. I mean, these are iconic properties that mean something to people, right? Like these are things that kids, run to the store and want to collect the latest toy and they feel some type of way about a specific character they really care about. These are properties that have stood the test of time and have been there for decades and will continue to be here even beyond this. So I think companies like ours have a challenge, but also an opportunity to think through what do you do with the iconic brands that you already have that mean something to people? How do you layer some Web3 native ethos into that and what you're going to do with that? But also, by the way, maybe you could and should create some Web3 native IP that maybe you have a little bit room to experiment with. I think both will happen.
So since what you do as a day job is advertising, right? You're the director of sales at Paramount. So if one of the native Web3 companies came to you and said, hey, we want to we have all the organic word of mouth chatter and the vested interest in what we're doing, but we want the broader world to know. We want to onboard tens of millions of people into what we're doing. And they come to you and they say, hey, well, what are our options to get the word out in a more traditional formats? How would you ever guide somebody that is sitting on a huge intellectual property brand and has this massive community to bridge that into traditional advertising? Because it's not going to be the same path by which all the normal Global 2000 brands do advertising. It must be much different. So how do you think through that in terms of how they do it now and certainly how they might think about this in the near future?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think it's a question we'll probably experiment and learn from, but here's some thoughts. I'll give you an interesting example. Like I like to think that not much of this is new. And I think history is repeating itself just in a different way. And what I mean by that is when you saw e-commerce as an example, and you had direct to consumer brands saying, hey, direct to consumer is the way, and that's the only way. And then you had certain stores, other brands saying it's all about the storefront. And that was important, but so was this. It turns out it's not an or game, it's an and game. So I bring that up because I do think eventually there are some what I'll call maybe Web3 native ways of advertising, which we can talk about and I think are actually really exciting. But I do think there might come a time, and in some cases sooner rather than later, where their Web3 native IP is going to go down the traditional route, whether it's Doodles, for example, having their experience at South by Southwest, where they partnered with Bayer, and that was an incredible activation. And maybe at some point they go down the route of licensing, where you're going to now potentially see, let's say, Doodles or Cool Cats or whoever. I'm not trying to predict who it's going to be, but having coloring books and bedding and backpacks, and like they're going to be across the entire storefront, just like you have the brand of Nickelodeon across the entire storefront. So I think it's an and game, not an or game. And I think thinking about some of the Web3 native ways of approaching things as well as traditional advertising, I think is important. From a big brand perspective, though, I think I like to think of the ways of engaging, call it 4 big buckets. You have the opportunity to sponsor something. You have the opportunity to partner with a brand or a set of brands. You also have the opportunity to acquire somebody or even build your own thing. So they all serve a purpose. I would say the idea of sponsoring something, maybe that's something like what Bayer did. Admittedly, that might even be a longer term partnership. I'm not aware of the behind the scenes details, but the idea of partnership, the best example I'm thinking of is Adidas and what they're doing with Bored Apes and Pixel Law. That's interesting. And I think both of those I love because they're coming from a place of, I don't know everything about this new ecosystem and I want to learn with you, the community, and lead with value, and then start mixing in who I am as a brand with the community. I think that's an incredible way to approach it. I think it's a good way to learn. I think that's probably the best early start. You obviously have others. When you think about acquisition, you have Nike acquiring Artifact. I think it was a very bold and aggressive move. And I can only imagine the moment they did that, every Fortune 100 around the company started having conversations about this. I would say, last year when Meta, like Facebook changed its name to Meta, and then when Nike acquired Artifact, those are 2 major catalysts that big companies couldn't ignore. And then the idea of building your own is a really big, in some cases, scary concept at these companies. But you don't have to do that by yourself. Like you can find partners, right? I joke around, everyone's trying to find their dance partner, whether it's from a technology standpoint, like what chain are you going to build things on? What technology part are you going to work with Manifold or others? Like, I think it's important to learn by doing. So find those internally at your companies that care about this out of their own interests. Like they're not doing this for a job. They're doing this because they truly care. And I think naturally bring those people together as a way to move the space forward.
One of the things you think a lot about is the future of retail in regards to where things go with NFTs and Web3. When you think about retail, do you think of just the Walmarts and the Targets retail? Are you thinking also like quick service restaurants, the McDonald's and the Burger Kings? Is that one big category of retail in your mind? And should all these different global brands be approaching this? And what would maybe be some advice by which they take some steps toward progress in making good decisions as they enter the space?
Yeah, no, I love that. I do think of it as one big bucket. I mean, there's sub buckets within that big bucket, like admittedly, what I'll call mass retail and even club, those are different in themselves. And certainly QSR is completely different, but they all have a place, right? So when we think of QSR, let's talk metaverse for a sec. You have both decentralized metaverses, up and coming places like Sandbox, or places that already exist, like, Decentraland, Somnium Space, et cetera. You also have Roblox or Fortnite in centralized ecosystems. What you're starting to see, at least early on, is some of these brands are starting to dive in into centralized metaverses like Roblox, currently probably being the biggest winner, where Nike has stepped up, Chipotle has stepped up, and others. Chipotle, I think, is a really cool example I like to talk about because they had an experience during Halloween last year where if you dressed up your character in Halloween outfits, went into their store and participated in that experience, you were able to get a coupon that you were able to claim in a physical storefront. That's driving sales to a physical store from an experience you had in a game. Now, this is even beyond Web3 because arguably Roblox not Web3, but it plays to the whole idea of when you think about elements that have defined culture and driven culture forward. Music has been the biggest for a long time, then arguably sports. Gaming is certainly the third. And gaming is playing into the thesis of Web3 in a really, really big way.
We talk about interoperability for a moment. I want to take this back to retail. So in retail stores, you have the Sam's Club and the Walmarts and the Costco's, and they have their interoperable products. Costco is with Kirkland brand. It's inoperable. It's not going anywhere else. Then they have Procter & Gamble, and you're going to find that at any of those different stores. So when you start to think through the development of the metaverse, big global 2000 brands jumping in and not just playing in one of the sandboxes, the sandbox and Decentraland, but maybe the closed metaverses as well, the meta horizons, certain things are going to be just for those environments because that's the structure, whether it's right or wrong, doesn't matter. And certain things ideally will be able to go from place to place. How do you see this playing out, especially from the large global brand perspective?
Yeah, there's a few ways that I think about this. High level interoperability, I do think is an important concept and a really powerful one in this space. I also think it's generally speaking far out. And I don't even know that you'll ever get full interoperability. I believe alliances will be made, and let's call it this digital asset will work across these ecosystems and this will work across these others. Like, I think things like that will happen. There's a whole lot that has to happen in terms of technology standards to make interoperability a possibility. That said, a different way to think about this, but I think that's valuable, by the way. That actually, from a brand perspective, allows you to experiment with different things while the system is not fully built out or arguably broken. Getting built is probably a better way to say it. And then seeing what works. So the moment you get into a place and time where there is more complete interoperability, you'll know what actually did work and what didn't work, and you'll be able to double down. I think it's a great time to test and learn. In terms of activating it, there's a different way that I would think about that as well, which is, I'll word it in a different way. When Procter & Gamble has a portfolio of products, or even let's take Nickelodeon for SpongeBob, the Walmart buyer is not buying the same exact thing that the Amazon buyer is buying, or the same thing that the Kroger buyer is buying, or Target buyer is buying. Like, it's still the same IP, it's still even the same collection, but they may have a different product mix based on what makes sense for their shoppers. The person that shops at Target is not the same person that shops at Walmart. So that's an interesting thing to think through. I'll take a step back and say, I think a lot of the initiatives from brands will likely be centralized at the brand level. I think in many ways, rightfully so. But I do think they're going to have to think about their retail strategy. How do you leverage NFTs as a way to drive commerce, both in store and online? And you clearly can't have one blanketed approach because your retail partners are not all buying the same thing. So you may have to have you're going to have some way where it forks for Walmart to have their own unique experience and Target to have their own unique experience. So it could be some version of, here's the high level program and initiative, and these, let's say, SpongeBob toys, this one's unique to Walmart, this one's unique to Target. And in order to collect them all, you're going to have to visit multiple retail storefronts. That could be an approach, but I think it's an important one. I think the retail partners are certainly thinking about this. Walmart filed for various patents last year, and this is going to become more top of mind, not less top of mind.
Well, we're going to learn so much at NFT.NYC this year because it'll be everybody coming together in one place, some for our core anchor event, and many for the hundreds of additional events and parties and things that go on around that week. And what's going to end up happening is we're just going to get a ton of insight on what brands are thinking. They're going to be speaking, they're going to be having booths set up and doing activations, they're going to be having, and so we'll see where are they at, where's the pulse. Let's end our conversation with the future. So Joel, what's your thought process in terms of a decade out, not in a season, not in a year, but how do you see some of this playing out? And if you want to just be specific to one thing, like talk about every receipt at Walmart is going to be an NFT with utility, a specific, cool, but give me an idea of what are you looking toward over the course of the next decade as these things start to play out and just become like turning a light switch off and on, running water at the sink. It just becomes a part of how things operate and get done.
Yeah, I'll connect it a little to the present and build into the future. I think what you're seeing at the moment is internal conversations across brands and agencies for that matter. This concept of custodial wallets versus non-custodial wallets, credit card payments versus cryptocurrency. Like, how do I reward the people that have built my brand to be who they are today without almost disregarding them because they're not a crypto native? Like, it's an interesting dynamic that over time will play out. More people will learn the ecosystems. I think you'll likely have people have the custodial wallet and credit card approach work for most major brands in the short term, with the ability to then move some of those into a decentralized ecosystem if and when that user wants to, as they learn and grow in their journey. I think if it gets locked in a centralized ecosystem and there's no way out of that, that's a problem. But if you give them the ability to like, hey, we'll take care of everything, but the moment you want to move it to your own stuff, you can. I think that's going to be incredibly important short term. As we move further out, I think it's going to be second nature. Benoit from Artifact Team talks about people's digital identity in some cases being worth as much, if not more, than their physical identity. As insane as that sounds, I believe that to be true. I think people will have all sorts of digital assets, which they will value more than many physical assets, and they'll be able to use it across different ecosystems. And that will give them access to experiences and networking opportunities, product drops, all sorts of different things that they may not have had otherwise. And they'll be able to either keep that themselves or resell it. This idea of, you're not stuck with that necessarily. You're able to actually find a buyer on the other side. And you have a public ledger that's viewable by everyone globally. Like, it's incredible. Like, the technology behind the scenes here, beyond the NFT hype, is actually really, really powerful. So I do think it'll be across the board. People do talk about this idea of anything that can be NFT'd will. I would say yes, with a caveat. There are some things that I would not want to be fungible tokens or non-fungible tokens. I think soul-bound tokens, like Vitalik is talking about, are really important. This idea of like my personal identity or a deed of a house being something that is not transferable is really important.
Yeah. We have, well, I often say we're in the third trimester in the womb. We aren't even born yet. So a lot of it, we're painting walls blue because we think we're having a boy, and due dates probably, but some people get confused because there's a lot of money, a lot of activity, a lot of media, a lot of press. Events have grown 50, 100x size. So a lot of people think, oh, this is like an adolescent, running into teenage years. Now, we are very, very, very early in every respect. How we do community, I could go on and on. Thank you for sharing with us today. Glad to have you come back, not just to enjoy the event as you did last year, but to be one of the speakers, sharing your intelligence, your wisdom, your experience with us. And it's fun to bring somebody that wears two hats, right? You have your NFT Web3 world of activity, investment, passion, and then you have your day job at a huge brand. You've worked with all these brands in the past. So really fun to learn from you. I'm glad you jumped in, and I look forward to seeing you in New York very, very soon.
Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to meeting you in person.
You too. Everybody that watched the conversation, thank you for your attention.